Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our next iteration of Leadership Reimagined, Unveiling Toxicity and Charting a Course for Change. Today's event is going to be chaired by Danny Cairns, and Danny, I'll let you do the intros for everybody else and not steal too much thunder. We would ask that you remain on mute and obviously do raise your hand and use the chat facility to sort of raise any questions or to participate in the chat. As always, the session will be recorded, so for those who are unable to join can watch this on playback. But without further ado, Danny, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Jodie. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our second panel around the topic of toxic leadership. Our last one had so much brilliant interaction that Jodie, Natalie, and the team invited us back for a second round. As introduced earlier, my name is Danny Cairns, and I'll be your chair today for the discussion titled Leadership Reimagined, Unveiling Toxicity, Charting a Course for Change. And we'll be investigating how in today's dynamic and fast-paced defence environment, how toxic leadership can manifest within an organisational structure and various hierarchies, what we can do to combat that, and how we can give more people a voice into combating it. Before I hand over to our esteemed panel members, I'll give you a brief introduction about myself. I'm an air traffic controller in the Royal Navy and a strong advocate for diverse, transparent leadership within the defence sector. As the current co-chair for the Navy's LGBTQ+ network and the training manager for air traffic control, I get to interact with a wide range of people and different leadership styles in a very varied working environment. These experiences have shaped my own approach to leadership, and I hope they will inspire you to continue developing your own too. Just like our first conversation, I've been joined by 4 fantastic panelists who are here to share their wisdom, talk about their own experiences within the sector, and answer your questions. With questions, however, please feel free to put them into the chat. We'll pick them up when we can, and any unanswered questions will be brought together and we'll be able to reply to you offline. Now, without much further ado, I shall pass you over to our first panelist to introduce themselves. Adam, can we start with you, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here again. Adam Versteeg. I'm the Chief People Officer at Janes. As many of you know, Janes is a global defence data company. I've been at Janes for around 4 years now, and then previous to that, I've done a range of different HR director roles. And in a previous life, in my first career, I was an infantry officer in the British Army.
Perfect, thank you, Adam. Libby, on to you, please.
Thank you very much, Danny. It's absolute privilege to be here again. Slightly different for me this time. I have recently demobilised from the army and now have entered civilian land, where I'm working for Capgemini as the Director for Defence and National Security within the Insights and Data team. So very much continuing my exciting work that I was doing inside the wire, but now outside the wire. I remain as a specialist reservist, so still providing hopefully valuable service. In terms of my years of experiencing leadership, I have seen every flavour of leadership across some very taxing and dynamic environments, both oil and gas and defence. So hopefully I can bring some valuable contributions to today's discussion. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you very much, Libby. That was great. Tony, if you could carry us on, please.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, hi everybody. Tony Simpson. I'm the Operations Director for the Justice segment in Sodexo Government in the UK. It's a long-winded way of saying that I look after our prison business in the UK. We manage 7 prisons. So not directly linked into forces, but actually quite a congruent service and background. I'm a prison governor to trade, so familiar with the balance between operations, public service, but also with a commercial edge as well. So I think pertinent to the conversation today.
Absolutely, Tony, thank you. And Lynn, if you'd like to finish us off, please.
Sure, thanks, Danny. Wonderful to be back, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Lynn Austin. I am the Director of International Facilities and UK Operations for General Dynamics Mission Systems, a global defence organisation. I have around 6 years experience in the defence sector, and previous to that, around 20 years within the financial services sector in various leadership roles. Looking forward to furthering the conversation that we had previously, and great to be back. So thank you.
Thank you all. That was great. It's nice to see that we've got such a diverse panel going forward, talking about this, how toxic leadership affects defence mainly. But we're going to start off, we're going to pick up exactly where we left off last time. And we're going to talk more about the toxic leadership in terms of an organisation and culture, and really start to muscle in down on that. So Libby, I'm going to pose the first question to you, if I may. And that first question is, what role does organisational structures, policies and systems play in enabling or mitigating these behaviours?
I thought you'd come to me first, Danny. Thank you. So I've thought about some of these questions, and this one in particular. So organisational structures. I think by that we mean hierarchy. And I think in terms of policies and systems, I think obviously policy is very important, process is very important for large organisations and small organisations, and the systems which enable or mitigate. So obviously if you've got really large organisations with very tall hierarchical structures, you have to be incredibly careful who you put at the top of those hierarchical structures. And I've been reflecting a lot about leadership because I work with the most amazingly diverse groups of people, and have done in my military time, but also in my civilian time as well, and looking at what makes really good leadership at the top so that we can totally mitigate against these sorts of behaviours. So it doesn't matter if you try to flatten structures and you have smaller organisations. It doesn't matter what kind of policies necessarily if you do not make the right hiring choices right at the top in leadership that can cascade their values and cultures which reflect those of the organisation down, it doesn't really matter what policies and procedures and systems you have. It's about hiring the right person. And when you think about the right person for hiring, it's important, I think, to look at their performance in other organisations. Toxic leadership is often sort of shrouded in people who perform well, but for short periods of time. So what does looking good, performance, not just in the short term, but long term look like? And are those traits not necessarily associated with toxic leadership? And therefore, are those the sorts of individuals that should be hired into the most senior positions so that they can cascade their values down the way? So I actually think it doesn't matter the size of the organisation and the policies, etc., etc. Look at the individuals who are being hired, look at their track record. And also, it's not just about performance and figures in relation to the person that you hire. If you hire a toxic leader, your output is significantly reduced, and the quality of your output is significantly reduced because the people in your teams do not want to work for that individual. So if there are any key indicators that start to demonstrate reduction in performance of key high-performing individuals or teams, and then the lack of product or the quality of the product that's coming out, then you've got some key indicators there. So I think the buck stops at the hiring position. Don't hire simply for someone who can churn out the numbers. It goes much broader than that. Look at the values that that person holds and how they perform over periods of time to deliver strategic long-term success. That was a long answer, Danny, but I hope that goes some way to answering it.
That was fantastic, Libby. Thank you so much. I was in a meeting this morning, actually, where we were discussing the difference between employing competent people for the overall culture rather than just that performance output of they're a high achiever, but do they actually represent what the values that we're looking to push out? And I think you summed that up brilliantly. Lynn, I'm going to pass the same question on to you, if I may, and get your take on it, please.
So it's interesting. I absolutely agree those hires are critical. But sometimes what I have seen and witnessed is actually toxic leadership which produces results. And when those results are produced, if the organisation is accepting of that slip in behaviours or the approach to leadership generally, that is a concern. But I've honestly seen toxic leaders thrive in organisations and been promoted in organisations because they have delivered and they have produced the results. I think we need to see a balance of what someone delivers and also how they deliver, and having that balance around ensuring that we're measuring people against the how, not just the what. And I think if we can get that right, then hopefully we balance the output with the right style of leadership, which helps people thrive within the organisation, not results at any cost.
Perfect, Lynn, thank you. I think a point that you both covered that we discussed last time was what actually is the definition of toxic leadership, because we all recognise that one style of leadership does not fit every problem, does it? And all of these different leadership styles could be seen as toxic in different environments. So I'm going to pass that Adam, I'm going to pass that question over to you as well, and just build upon that thought process further, please.
So, Danny, what exactly is the question?
Sorry, yeah. So we obviously are speaking about how organisational roles have play in enabling and mitigating these behaviours. Yeah. And then we spoke about performance as well. But I want to sort of build upon what Lynn just said of how do we balance that, particularly when there's so many different types of leadership styles within our working environment.
Yeah, and that's clear. I agree with Lynn in the sense of the way we think about it at Jane's actually is around the what and the how. And I think, it's a mature organization should have all of these processes in place. There should be a great code of conduct. There should be a whistleblowing process, all of that stuff. But it's ultimately about sort of colleagues seeing that an organization will actually take action and there'll be consequences around this stuff. So I think one of the most fundamental processes that most organizations will have to some extent is that performance process that runs through the year, from kind of setting someone's objectives to checking in to evaluating them. And I think what we've tried really hard to do is make the how almost, as important as the what. And it takes time, but demonstrating that someone won't get promoted if their behaviours are not what the organisation wants. And it's really hard because I think we said this last time, it's very easy to identify super toxic things. There's someone a leader that just shouts at their team the whole time. But ultimately, I think a lot of these things we're talking about are actually going to be quite subtle, and they're not going to be visible to lots of people. So I think there needs to be a kind of process you go through to help explain to leaders and colleagues, this is what we expect. This is what good looks like. These are our values. These are the behaviours. Your output has been great this year, but there have been multiple examples of you behaving in this way, and that falls. That is not what we expect, and showing that there's consequences to that. So I think having a performance process like that, where the how is really, really important, is a way of doing that.
I just build on something that Adam said there, if I could, around values within an organisation. I spent a period of time working for Nationwide Building Society, and their value set was deeply embedded within the culture, so much so that colleagues felt very comfortable challenging each other if they weren't living the values. And I found that super insightful, but also it created a culture where people were very conscious of how they interacted, their behaviours, how they worked together, how they collaborated. And I think there was a lot of value, excuse the pun, in those values being lived and breathed. And I wonder sometimes if we see values which are written but not necessarily lived and breathed on a daily basis. And I think that would help organisations who maybe struggle to bring those values to the fore and enable colleagues to work to them, but also challenge each other if they don't see that being lived and breathed through their leadership and through their senior team.
It's quite a brave thing though, Lynn, isn't it, to do? Especially if you are, I mean, I don't know so much in larger organisations, but perhaps in smaller organisations where it's a bit of a petri dish, it's a brave thing to do for someone to challenge toxic leadership, especially if that organisation is quite young. You know, we have been flooded in defence with startups and small SMEs. And they want to do well, and they are striving to get their first big contract or their first work, and they're often VC backed, and therefore there's lots of pressure, and therefore pressure to do well from leadership, and therefore sometimes the softer elements of what's required to build that safe environment to be able to challenge and talk and share the values is often sort of pushed to the edge a bit. So it is very challenging, I think, to give a one size fits all for every single organisation, but to recognise the bravery of people who do stand up for others when toxic leadership is recognised. But it is a brave thing to do, and I think we should recognise that.
Absolutely agree across the board. Thank you for that. Tony, have you got anything to add before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, just a couple of observations really to try and fill in some of the blanks. I'm violently agreeing with what everybody's saying. I suppose, you know, the impact of the individual, you know, to me overrides the structure. A good individual can make a bad structure work, and vice versa. And I was thinking about some of our kind of recruitment practice. And just, you know, just some of these little flags and these little tricks that you can play in very early, you know, that getting people to talk about their failures and getting people to talk about where it's not worked and where they've got it wrong, and where, you know, just almost gives you a very quick insight into people's capacity to understand that and to what extent they're self-serving, or, you know, are they recognise any of that. They're little tricks that we use in our business. You can understand that, you know, a prison governor, a prison director, you know, has a very, very direct impact, you know, in that command role on the prison that he or she is looking after. So, you know, that point about having an authentic style, you know, and not one style fits all, not one approach fits all. You've got to be an authentic person, and you've got to allow people to kind of, you know, be themselves, but also watch out for the triggers that we're talking about. And, you know, when you look up about toxic leadership, you know, words like, you know, a consistent approach, self-serving, you know, to the disbenefit of others. I think, you know, they're quite easy, I think, to spot when it's really bad. But just to pick up on Adam's point, you know, some of it is much more subtle than that. So you have to have your sensors at a much more kind of tuned level than perhaps you would. And, you know, we'll pick up on some of the other points as we go into other questions. But yeah, just that point that people will give themselves away, and there are ways that you can, you know, look for that if you want to look for it.
Brilliant. And I think that segues us really nicely into our next question, actually. What can individuals do when they see their peers or subordinates or even their higher ups behave in the natures that we've discussed a moment ago without risking their professional standing? Libby mentioned earlier about how brave it is to do so, but can we give people that are watching some tools or some advice to counter these behaviours? Lynn, can we start with you, please?
Sure. So I absolutely agree with what Libby said there. The suitability to be able to kind of raise a concern or interact in the moment and flag toxic behaviour, that takes bravery. It also takes psychological safety. So I think if you don't believe you have psychological safety in the environment you're interacting in, there are ways that you can then do something afterwards if you're not comfortable doing it in the moment. So I would say if you don't feel comfortable to challenge or just call out and say, excuse me, you know, that behaviour is inappropriate, can we just take a pause for a moment? You know, following up afterwards, either with the individual or your line manager or a member of the HR team, or there could be, you know, a trusted confidant that you could go to have a conversation and kind of decide the best course of action there. I think it is challenging, and I think we all recognise that. My advice would be to judge in the moment, do I feel comfortable to do this? If you don't, keep a mental record of what's gone on, who's in the room, the events, the actual wording that took place. And then, you know, please do reach out to someone subsequently, whether it be someone in HR or your line manager, to discuss what you've seen and observed and how you felt. I think that is important, but fully appreciate not everyone would feel comfortable challenging in the moment.
Really building that evidence-based background, really, isn't it, before going forward? Perfect, thank you. Tony, can you carry on, please? Because I think the thought process you were on previously really works well for this.
Yeah, no problem at all. I mean, and I think I would just build on what Lynn said, that, you know, apart from mental notes, there's nothing wrong with taking actual notes. You know, I think that there's no harm in that. I think people shy away from that sometimes because almost psychologically they've started a process. But, you know, the advice I would give is, if you feel the need to take notes, then there's probably a damn good reason for that. You might not be able to put your finger on what it is, but there's something around. And similarly, you know, if you don't feel comfortable challenging somebody in the moment, that is a very good cue to yourself that there's something, and that you can't just let that go, that there's something around that you perhaps have to go away or talk to a colleague about or seek advice on or whatever. But, you know, just again, recognizing those personal cues about when you feel safe or when you don't feel safe. But yeah, I think that, and, you know, not feeling the need to tackle it head on, I think, is really, really important. Because if it's, you know, if you're feeling that way, others may be too, and you've got to do it in a way that works for you, because, you know, there's no point damaging yourself in a particular interaction when that's not necessary, and there are ways in slower time that you can do that perhaps even more effectively.
Could I just add to that, if I may, Danny? Because Tony makes some awesome points as always. Especially the sort of not having to face it head on necessarily, but sort of going a roundabout way to try and solve the same challenges. I've experienced and seen where coaching works really, really well in these circumstances, and it's not just so it may be evidential based, but it instead of targeting individuals, coaching for the whole team, so that everybody feels safe, including those who are, you know, part of that potential toxic leadership sort of topic. And so holistic coaching for the team to create, as Lynn said, that psychological safety, safe places to make sure that the reaffirmation of the values and the culture of that organisation are embedded in everyone's thinking. And I think Lynn made the point, or maybe Adam made the point, it's not what, it's the how. And I remember this really clearly when I was working for an organisation in the oil industry. I was told by our operations director about, it's not the way we operate, the culture we operate in is how we do things. And it's not just about the revenue generation, it's us as a brand, as a culture, and the way we're perceived. And they believed, because it was a superhuman, like super people organisation, it really focused on great people. They were really keen to make sure that their brand was all about excellent people delivering excellence. And I think if a coaching mechanism can help build that excellence, you start to drive and squash down the hierarchical thinking of toxic leadership about the way we get things done, not just what we're trying to achieve.
That's fantastic, Libby. Thank you. To the floor, really, for further comments. Adam?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I agree, I mean, it's great to have a coaching culture. I think one of the other things that is really important, and I think there should be a range of interventions in any organization, but for, you know, one of the most powerful things to kind of show that colleagues are kind of safe to call out things is hearing from other colleagues, sharing their experiences. So, for example, if you're able to sort of facilitate sessions where colleagues kind of talk about past experiences in an open forum, that can be a really powerful thing. So someone saying, you know, I experienced, you know, getting repeatedly talked over in meetings, and this is how it made me feel. That can be actually more powerful than any training session. If they see that that colleague over there talked about that, they talked about that openly, and that can sort of build confidence, I guess, and build this sense of, okay, this is the, you know, this is a safe place.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Rob.
This may not be the right point to introduce this, but I was just thinking back to that point about the what and the how. And, you know, what's often quite helpful is to help people think about, when you talk about what do you mean? Because there's short term and long term, isn't there? You know, and, you know, judging success by winning the skirmish, you know, or by winning the particular encounter is one thing, but is that going to win the war? And you know, the what isn't just about the today, is it? The what is about that long-term sustainable business growth, business delivery, retention, you know, all the other positive indicators. And that's a helpful way, and I think, to help people break through that thing about, yeah, I don't like it, but it's getting things done. Well, it might be getting things done today, but it's not going to keep getting things done. And then that, I think, allows that challenge on a professional level to say, actually, you're not helping me in the longer term, even though you think you're getting something done right now.
Absolutely. And I think a point I want to build on from Adam, on top of your comments there, Tony, is building that culture of trust. Like, can I trust my organization? Can I trust my peers and hierarchy? So that when you do make these challenges, or you take actions upon the evidence that Lynn spoke about earlier, that there's going to be some level of action about it, and it's not just falling on deaf ears, really. Lynn, you were about to make a point.
Yeah, I was just going to talk, when we discussed there how we tackle that, I think there's another lens to this as well, in terms of what is tolerated and accepted within the organisation. And I think as a leadership group, if you are seen to tolerate certain behaviours within meetings, that always almost suggests that's how we do things around here and that's acceptable. And I think as leaders, we need to be more prepared to challenge and step in and interact possibly with that within that particular meeting or event, because otherwise I think we then lose the trust of other colleagues, because it's seen as silence is accepting that leadership behaviour, and almost ratifying it in some way. So I think there's an element of not walking by problems because it's too difficult to step in and interact and have that challenging conversation. But I believe if you wish to create that culture of trust, that culture of values, that culture of accepted behaviours, that does require us to constantly evolve and work towards that. It's not something that stays static. With every new arrival, new leader, there will be changes to that balance, and it's around creating that constant flow of acceptable behaviours and trust between leadership and across the organisation, that across the piece we won't accept behaviours that fall below standard, and the organisation will quickly interject and act upon them, because that's how we do things around here. And ultimately that's what you're aiming towards.
Yeah,
Lynn,
I
sorry, Adam, go ahead.
Well, I was just, going to agree vigorously. I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's a military phrase, isn't it? The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. But it is just so true. And I think it takes time. I think colleagues need to see that there'll be consequences and things will be happening. I mean, it's one of the most demotivating things, and one of the highest reasons for someone quitting is for them to be in a team and there's someone that is a kind of disruptor or is disrupting the environment through their behavior. And I think that it doesn't happen immediately. That colleagues need to see that an organization over time will kind of, that person gets disciplined, that person we're not going to accept that anymore. And they need to, that over time you'll build up that trust, but it takes it takes time.
Thank you, Adam. I was going to sort of pick up on something Lynn said there, when this constantly evolving. I kind of really like that idea of, you know, the workplace being a living, breathing thing, if you will, like an ecosystem of things. When new people come in, I've noticed from experience, especially very senior people come in who are new into an organisation, that's really challenging. When you are trying to develop consistency in cultures, because senior leaders who obviously are coming in to make an impression, make a mark, often make a dent rather than a mark. And I've experienced a couple of those, and it's really, really challenging. And in fact, it was the reason why I left one organisation, because I just couldn't see a way forward, which is a real shame. So I'm glad that we're having these conversations. But I think, how do we think about bringing seniors in and ensuring that we're not just, because they are this all-seeing, wise, senior, experienced person coming into an organisation, that they're not called out alongside our peers or subordinates. I think it's really important to remember that as well.
Yeah, I think just building on that, you know, and this is something that I think others may wrestle with as well, is the how you do that, and being mindful to model good behaviours about how you yourself challenge those behaviours, and not doing it in such a way that actually, you know, demonstrates poor behaviours yourself, because not everybody will see the challenge. Not everybody will, you know, will see the stuff that happens respectfully and professionally behind closed doors, and people may not see immediate results as a result of those. And that's a challenge, I think. How do you communicate that you're tackling person X or person Y whilst respecting person X and person Y, and believing in their capacity to change and giving them that capacity to change, if that's the strategy?
It's a really tough one, right, Tony? You've just totally hit the nail on the head with that.
And I think, Libby, as well, what we sometimes see is the damage of a new toxic leader coming within the organisation, because there can be an element of this person is just adapting to the new culture. And actually, as Tony has said there, that it can take a while for the full impact to actually come to the fore, because sometimes it's the tip of the iceberg. What you may see in meetings behind closed doors, a lot more goes on. So it's, how do you monitor that individual settling into the organisation and naturally acclimatise into the culture and the approach and the way things are done? They need a period of time to adapt to that, whilst they're also, I think, as you mentioned, Libby, looking to make their mark, and set their personality almost into that frame. So I think that can be a challenge. I think they can be supported through that, and how organisations actually manage that introduction to the organisation, and how they measure that success within a time frame is quite key.
Absolutely amazing points across the floor. A conversation that we're having within the armed forces at the moment is, what is somebody's impact upon the culture that we currently serve in? So when we're looking at our leaders stepping up, etc., yes, they may be absolutely competent at their job, but are they going to continue representing the values that we put so much time and effort into employing? But also, are they going to continue to build our culture as we evolve and balance ourselves as we move forward? And of course, like we've mentioned, that takes time. Culture is not a quick beast to change. But I think that segues us really nicely into what strategies can be employed to ensure that leaders maintain that healthy balance of authority, but also empathy. So we understand that empathetic leaders can be toxic also. It's not always about the authority, but how can we balance that within our organizations? Adam, I'm going to hand this one to you, please.
Yeah, so I mean, I've always said, to the point of being a bit of a bore about it, but the single biggest priority. So I think being a people leader today, or someone that's responsible for other people, has become so much more difficult a job than it was even 10 years ago. So the complexity, particularly in businesses that are kind of global, dispersed, all of that stuff, it's become a really difficult job. So I think an organization that doesn't continuously invest in those people and spend time with them, talking to them about, you know, how it expects them and wants them to behave, that's not a good thing. So I think there needs to be a lot of focus on that. And I think it's also this idea of like sort of situational kind of leadership. It's sort of you want people that have different gears, leaders that have different settings, so they can kind of, there are times where actually a fairly robust approach is required, but there are also times that will walk straight into another meeting and have to be really nurturing and supportive. And I think a leader that can only get into one gear is kind of, you know, you need more than that now. And the world is more complex. You've got people have got different expectations. Certainly in our business, I mean, the expectations for around how people will work, the flexibility they will have, all of that is sort of changed quite rapidly. And I think leaders need quite a big tool set to deal with that. And they need some different approaches. They need to be able to switch their style quite quickly. So I think spending a lot of time on that is really important.
100%, Adam. Thank you very much. Libby, can you follow up, please?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you, Danny. I think sometimes when we have these discussions, we're talking about human beings, and we are human beings. And I'm really glad that the words, you know, empathy have been brought in, because that's a human behaviour, it's a human trait. And when we think about toxic leadership, we should also think about examples of brilliant leadership. And I have many of those in my experience. And I'll sort of recount a short story, if I may, about a brilliant leader who I have maintained contact with throughout my career, and who I worked directly with and for at two stages. So directly with at one stage, and had worked for him previously. And we, every Friday, we would have our sales meetings. And I was a technical person, but I used to have to sit in on these meetings. And he was pretty robust with our sales team this Friday morning. Not the greatest position to be in on a Friday, going into a weekend, thinking you're going to have a nice weekend, and realizing you're a little bit behind on target. But it was a really hot day. And we were in Aberdeen, and there were very, very few hot days in Aberdeen. And because it was a Friday, after this very robust meeting and people sort of going away and licking their wounds for a few hours before lunchtime, he went out and bought ice lollies and ice creams for absolutely everybody, told us to go and sit in the sunshine and then take the rest of Friday afternoon off. And when you talk about the balance between authority and empathy, that was the perfect example of where you have to remember that we are human beings, and that balance is really important. And I'm sure if you were to have added toxic leadership into that mix, you wouldn't have had ice lollies in the afternoon off. But I think we do need to remember the things that make really brilliant leaders. And the fact that everybody came back on the Monday morning, having had the Friday afternoon off, absolutely raring to go, ready to smash sales figures, because they were ready and willing to work for that individual, because they demonstrated both authority on that day and empathy. Where there is toxic leadership, you don't want to come back to work on a Monday morning, and you don't want to smash those sales figures. And the product that you do deliver is probably not going to be anywhere near as good as someone who buys you ice lollies and gives you the afternoon off on a Friday. So I think it's a hugely important point, and that to remember we are human beings, and that human beings react to empathy, they act to kindness, and they react to love. And those are really, really important things that I believe, including the love part, in the right way, obviously, it is important in the workplace. You must be kind and care for the people under your authority. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I come in on the back of that? Thanks. That's a super point, Libby, actually. And we talk about values, and you can come at this from two ways. You can go on about toxic leadership and all the things you shouldn't do, or you could really major in all the things that you should do, and that people do want to see. So that kind of clear values statement, code of conduct. But I suppose taking it further than that, and and many organisations do this, don't they? What would this look like? What would it feel like? What would I hear? What would I see? And be able to bring that to life for people, so that in recognising non-toxic behaviours, de facto what you're doing is you're calling out things that aren't that. And I think that's a much more positive way to look at it. Obviously, to have mechanisms to pick up when people don't meet these standards, but that playing on the positive, that playing to people's strengths, role modelling why being non-toxic can be successful. I think it's a much more positive, empathetic way to look at things, and I think will bring people with you. You can see it without saying it, is my point. By focusing the other way. But yeah, that, how does it look? How does it feel? How does it taste? How does it smell? And then you'll know if it's here or not.
I think we all spend so much time at work. I think we recognise the impact that a good manager can have on you as an individual and have on your life, essentially. It can affect your personal life significantly if you don't have a great manager. So for me, I think recognising people as individuals, equipping line managers with the skills to enable them to do the job effectively. I think, as Adam mentioned earlier, we've got such a variety of generations now that line managers are trying to manage, all with different requirements, all with different value sets. It's a hugely difficult task. And I believe some organisations see individuals contributing well, and those are the people that get promoted. How do we then equip them to lead people effectively, and supporting them on that journey and providing them with coaching as they move forward is hugely important. I think recognising the impact, as I said earlier, of great line management, how that can really drive high performance within a team. And then on the other side, recognising that if we don't get it right, or if a person struggles in a line management position, the impact that has on their team, both individually for them personally, but also for the organisation. So equipping line managers, coaching them, enabling them to do the job more effectively is hugely important.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'd just sort of add another bit, is that I think, again, there are sometimes just some pretty basic misconceptions about what being a good leader actually is. And I think unless you've talked about what kind of works for you in your organization, you can't expect all of those people to know. So, this idea, for example, just trying to reframe some common misconceptions, this idea that kind of asking for help as a leader, that's a strength, right? That's not some sort of weak leadership trait. Or saying no to something, that's not bad. That's good. We want people to have boundaries and to be able to kind of focus on what they're delivering. So I think there's work to be done around helping leaders who have responsibility for people understand what's actually what you require of them.
I think a big part of that as well is enabling these new line managers, new leaders, the ability to fail and to make a mistake as well. We learn so much more from making a mistake, or being like, right, I've tried this, it clearly doesn't work for me, let's move on. And just providing that safety net within the team as well for that leader to be able to form their own leadership style. Just building upon what Adam said as well, of having that line manager learn how to say no, for instance. One of the most influential leaders in my career turned around to me very early on and said, no is a complete sentence. And I've absolutely taken that forward on of make your decisions, don't second guess your decisions all the time, but also be willing to say that wasn't the best decision I've just made, and learning from that mistake and moving forward. So massively happy with that. We've got about 5-10 minutes more, so I'm just going to move us on to the next question. And Tony, if you can start us off, please, of How can we, as leaders, build a workplace environment that allows employees to speak up against the behaviours that we've identified today, but also to promote the positive characteristics that we've identified also?
So I think I've talked about the positive characteristics in that last part, really, just about being really clear on what they are and celebrating them. And I think that, the first point about this is about making it okay to talk about it. And, and it doesn't even have to be personal, even just the subject of leadership and what does good leadership feel like and what does bad leadership feel like. Even those broad conversations allow people to think of the possibility that something might exist, and that might be something that we've got to face into, and then how do we do that? So, I think just having it as a topic that's not a shadow topic, doesn't have to even be present for it to be raised, but just as a possibility, but then making it very clear, as I say, what's acceptable and what is unacceptable. And there's a real common thread here, isn't there, about, walk the walk. People judge you on what you actually do, not what you say at a town hall or not what you say in a team brief. It's, it's what you actually do in real life that people would judge you by. So, it's that leading by example, day in, day out, when people aren't, even when you think people aren't looking, just how you manage that. So, personal impact plus creating that environment where it's okay to talk, I think are two main things for me.
Could I perhaps add to what Tony's just said there about if toxicity and negativity and negative dynamics do exist, is there a way to marginalize those behaviours and sort of isolate them rather than necessarily evidence-based, people against people, he said, she said, etc., they said, but to marginalize behaviours? And I'll go back to the same person who was the boss who bought the ice lollies on the hot day in Aberdeen. That person used to walk around the office, and it was a big office where all the technical people were, and just say good morning to absolutely everybody, every single day, without fail. How's it going? Who are you off to see today? If you were in the office, that was. And those sort of, that engagement and that careful feeling of that person cares about their team, they care about me, they care about the things that I'm doing. It kind of fostered this environment of kindness and sharing and the ability to have the moments of really difficult conversations and have those moments of empathy like I've just described. So when you talk about creating environments that call out that behavior, maybe it's that maybe they're behaviors which marginalize and cause that to dissipate or dissolve completely into the background. Because if you see a leader going and talking to everybody, then you're probably more likely to go and talk to some co-workers in a different place and ask them some of the same questions because you've actually seen it. And it's something I make a real effort to do. When I have a team of people that I'm looking after, I make sure that every day I have a chat with them. How was your evening? What are you doing? Not invasive, but just inclusive and engaging to ensure that everyone feels empowered and engaged. And there isn't a barrier to, oh, she sits in that glass office over there, and therefore she's more important than me, because that's not the case. Because somebody said something really cool about teams. I have failed on many, many occasions. I need brilliant people around me to stop me failing so badly. But also because they are much better at many other things. So developing that environment which marginalizes those behaviours in the first place or dissolves them, I think is super important too. I don't know how others feel about that. It's a bit of a softer approach, but
I think visible leadership, approachable leadership, that opportunity for people to feel they can engage and talk to you is hugely important and almost sets a tone. I think we've mentioned psychological safety. Creating an environment where people know they can come to you with problems is key. I think people need to feel supported and able to raise risks, issues, concerns, and not feel fear. And cultivating that correct environment is so multifaceted. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes long-term investment. It takes building trust within yourself and your leadership team. I think it takes honesty, and I think it also requires you to be vulnerable and share. And I certainly share things that I haven't got right with my team and talk to them about what I've learned about myself and what I would do differently going forward. And I think being able to share in that way encourages others to reflect on their behaviours and maybe share things that they would do differently. So I think it's not about showing a veneer of perfection constantly. It's about talking honestly about things we would do differently, what we've learned from different interactions and projects, but just creating that open door policy at all time. And whether you're remote or whether you're in the office, being able to chat to people or let people know if they want to speak to you, you're available and they can do. And actually, they're important because they're part of your team.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I loved Libby's example about sort of, walking the floor. I mean, I think there are some leaders, though, that do have more complex situations or different situations. So we've got leaders that their teams are entirely remote and dispersed. And of course, that can be quite challenging. So I think the other thing which we need leaders to sort of utilize is all the various technology communication channels that are available to them. And then I think one of the other things that we try and do is, actually calling out examples of good behaviors. So actually rewarding people and giving out awards for particularly kind of values focused behaviors. So yeah, I think having mechanisms in place where you get some formal recognition for that can help reinforce the values. But I think I think some leaders have challenging circumstances to deal with, and it can be, what you'd love to do is you'd love to go and see all of those people, but it's really hard. So you need to have some other tools as well.
Adam, can I just briefly pick up on that, because I totally get that. It's a really, and as I think Tony said, we're in a very complex world of people in diverse locations. One company that I worked alongside, we had a book club, and I being super dyslexic, I was really like, oh, I'm not sure about this, but I got it as an audio book, and we were able to share every week as a team, including senior leadership, our thoughts just on these books. And that was like the virtual walking the floor. And that's just one example of many ways that people can just have fun. And as Lynn said, we spend so much time at work. That fun element, if that is demonstrated by senior leadership, it kind of cascades through and pervades everybody. So there are other ways. So sorry, Adam, for not making the virtual world as clear as the physical.
No, brilliant. I love it.
Sorry, and just to build on that, really, it's a truism that I heard, that you can be present even though you're not there physically, and you can be absent even though you are. And and that's that's more about people believing that you think about them as an individual, that you're thinking about them even though they're not there, that you're approachable, etc., etc. And it's because I've seen a lot of the management by walking about stuff. It's and you can do it, but actually it's in a non-trusting environment or in the wrong environment, it can backfire, because it's just that there they go again. That's it. 5 past 11 till 10 past 11 on rails, doing it because they have to, rather than the kind of they're doing it because they want to do it, or they're doing it because they're genuinely interested in people that are there. So yeah.
And when you highlight that empathy amongst the team and you're present, whether that is physically or virtually, it just allows you to, when you have to kick into that gear and you have to kick into being a bit more authoritarian, particularly in like an operational sense, for instance, people respect it and immediately know that, okay, this person stepped into this gear for quite a clear reason. and it just enforces that leadership style so much more effectively, doesn't it? Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up, I'm afraid, because we've hit that time. But thank you, all four of you, for your fantastic wisdom throughout this conversation yet again. It's been very much insightful, and I'm going to take away quite a lot. So thank you. And thank you to everybody that's joined us over their lunchtime. I understand that this is your free time after all, and you've come to listen to us talk, but massively thank you again. And if you want to watch our last one, it is up on the Women Empowering Defence website under their videos and podcast section, just where this one will be uploaded also. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Danny.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Danny.
Bye-bye.